Hi, all, and welcome to the 8th episode of our podcast, Widening the Circle as Sacred Story. This week, we'll be considering the question, what happens when we get a little behind in recording episodes? So, I'm your host, Sky Williams-Tao, and I use they, them pronouns. And you may have noticed that my usual co-host, Jamelia Omar, is not here. So, as the question suggests, we got a little behind in recording episodes. So this episode is going to be a clip episode. I pulled out some clips that I liked, that I thought worked really well as clips from our first 7 episodes. So there's 1 or 2 clips from each episode. And this episode will just be a compilation of those clips. For those of you who are following us on YouTube, I plan to make a YouTube playlist that has all of those clips so you can watch them in their individuality. And if you particularly like them, feel free to share in your spaces. For those of you who are following us in podcast land, I couldn't figure out how to create a separate podcast playlist without just spamming the main episode list with a bunch of 1-minute long clips. So you can enjoy them in this compilation. I hope you all enjoy. And thanks for following along with us.
The last thing I really want to say about covenant is that we have to practice it. It is itself a practice of doing it, but we also have to practice doing it and practice coming back to covenant. Which means that we have to value the process of that over the product. We have to value the process of coming back to relationship more than always being in relationship, because we're human. We're going to fail at it. We're going to make mistakes. And as we were kind of perseverating on this podcast and worrying about our own personal failings and our internalized isms, just being worried that we're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or present it in the wrong way. And I think the agreement that we've come back to is that the process of doing it is more important than the final product that we come to in any given moment. And we can revisit those moments when we make mistake or fall out of covenant. And that's really hard. I'm a perfectionist and I want it to be right and perfect and done. And so to say, no, it's the process of uncovering where the meaning is made and where the relationships are held.
Which I do love, and I think one thing we talked about was having a covenant, having a static covenant. But actually, I feel like just hearing you say that, I think it is. I think we'll name some of the principles, right? Because we have some principles and some ideas that we really want to, let guide our work.
Right.
And I think there's something really real in what you're saying, that it's not about the 5 lines that you write. In a way, it's about this, the practice and the process and coming back and really trying to do this important work, right, of looking at this prophetic story about talking about the religion we love together. And I actually underlined this the first time I read it, and then I underlined a longer section this time I read it, but it was while proximity may not always guarantee expertise. Oh, this is on page XIX in the introduction, under the section A Word About Centering. That's where I'm reading from. In the second paragraph, it says, while proximity may not always guarantee expertise, it does guarantee experience, and often greater discernment due to higher personal stakes. And this is more about that. It talks about when we lean into the idea of centering the leadership of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, rather than following it, understanding that following may be necessary, we find a path, which was in response to, they were talking about, some of how, people, some have taken the idea of centering the leadership of Black, Indigenous people, and people of color and minimized it into a simple process wherein white or white identified people express a desire for collaboration while avoiding the work they are only they are in a position to do, or even worse, they've misrepresented that suggestion to enmesh beleaguered Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color within their communities into inequitable and toxic systems of labor, responsibility, and accountability. That's sort of, and I'm reading that from all over this section of A Word About Centering.
I think too, I want to bring us back to because I want to point out the note addressing the pandemic, because this is a very timely, it was a very timely publication in terms of coming out kind of what now is early in the pandemic. Then it was like mid-pandemic, but now it's like that was way long ago. That was really early in the pandemic. I think that note is really important because it encapsulates some of the learnings that I've taken out of pandemic times, which are, they talk about disparities and how the pandemic revealed so many more disparities. I think about the reading about the when you move a log back, it uncovers all of the creepy crawlies underneath. That's really what part of what the pandemic did, was to expose some of these things that we ignore all the time. And then the awareness of access that we came to from the pandemic, that in my congregation, we had people that would come to YouTube worship and then come to Zoom social hour, and said, I haven't been to church in person in years because my X, Y, and Z has prevented me from accessing your church. And it has kept to the front the priority of access and how access precedes welcome. We can't actually be welcoming if we're not accessible to our people. And so to talk about that in the context of ability and disability, but also in the context of race, like this text does. So clearly you and I have crossed a threshold of trust with this report. Was there anything in the methods section or the introduction that pushed you over that edge, that said, yeah, I trust these, I trust their methods, I trust that the results are in good faith based on these methods? Was there a moment for you that made that coalesce?
Yeah, I'm not sure it actually came out of this report, to be honest. Like, I think by the time I got to this report, I was kind of on board, which, like, I do think, like this in reading the methodology, right? It's like this set of things they did. They did interviews, they did a call for people to come talk to them. They did a collaborative. But like I feel like my actual memory of it is like following them and being like, oh, they had, like, I did a testimonial and then like talk to somebody, right? Like in the context of this report, like, and then they also posted things. So it wasn't only this final report. They actually were putting things out all through the 3 years of their work. And so like following them and seeing, like what was coming out, I think by the time I got to the report, I think I was actually kind of already on board because of that sense of like trust in the process and in seeing what I was seeing.
On page XXV, so what is that, 25? That they were talking about in the section on avatars, and they said explicitly the fact that anonymity was required for people to feel comfortable sharing speaks to the extent of the racial divide and power imbalances. And I think one of the critiques of the methodology that they used was these anonymous avatars. And I've heard that from several people that, well, if you had this experience, you should have the confidence to stand up and say your experience. And I think they explain very concretely in different places in the text why the avatars are anonymous. And I think that statement is really important, that they were walking this really important line between finding enough information that there was compelling evidence and also protecting people. These are real people that have been and could in the future be really damaged by this report. And I think, the religious trauma of what could happen if people were honest about their experience, makes this methodology, I think, really complicated. And I really wanted to lift up the commissioners for trying to walk that line of here's the testimony, this is real people, and we're going to protect them. We're going to keep them as safe as we can, even in this kind of investigation of what, you know, is going on that that some people might not see on a regular basis.
We're really lucky because in Unitarian Universalism, we have, we've been doing a lot of this work for a long time. And so what's being asked of us isn't necessarily new. It is just work we're being asked to do more intentionally, and also centering the needs of a broader community. And that's the rub, right? Like right there in that piece, it's that intentionality and that shifting the center that's causing us a lot of heartache and a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding. But I think that we have the advantage over other faith communities, and we need to use that advantage. A lot of the things that we have to think about when we think about survival is what we need to emphasize, what we need to shift our focus to. I'm thinking about like how, we have this trend of people moving away from institutional religion. And so we have to think about like what replaces that? What can we do to fill that hole if that isn't the priority? And so I'm thinking about like how we need to create social and cultural communities, and how we are in a really good position to lead the charge on cultural competence. I'm thinking about how we can create more inclusive spaces for children and youth so that they want to stay and so that they're part of this forming and this faith formation. We love our social justice initiatives. Like, what does it mean for us to continue to lead those with intention? And then also thinking about how we can create opportunities that influence the economics of the people who are part of the system already, right? Like how do we build community organizers? How do we train them? How do we fund these in our congregations? Those are things I think that are really important for us to think about. Absolutely. And I think that you're reading this and you're looking at this picture of where we are, and it feels like we're in a place we can't get out of, and that's something hard to hold, right? Like to know that like something you've invested your time, your life into, it's falling apart, and it feels like it's not ever going to be the same. And one of the things I always invite is, yes, like it's not ever going to be the same, but like that's also an opportunity for it to be better.
So the idea of this one is, if you're in an elevator and you're talking about your faith, whatever, somebody asks you, what is Unitarian Universalism? They don't know anything about the faith. What do you answer in as little time as it takes for the elevator to get to the next floor? So in 1 or 2 sentences.
I have 2 answers to this question. I have 2 elevator pitches, and I think all of us do. So one of them is, what information is this person looking for? And the other one is, what information do I want them to have? And I think often our elevator pitches default to the what information we want them to have. And what information they actually glean from that is that Unitarian Universalists are insufferable. So I try now to default to the information that they want to have. So I'm a hospital chaplain, and sometimes a patient or their family will ask, "Chaplain, what religion are you?" And I'll say, "I'm a Unitarian Universalist, but I serve everyone. It doesn't really matter," which is not technically true. It does matter very much to me, but it doesn't matter in that moment. And the way I live out and demonstrate Unitarian Universalism is by not answering with the insufferable theological answer. Sometimes a staff person, like a nurse or a doctor, will say, "Chaplain, what's Unitarian Universalism?" And in that case, I give them the information they are looking for, which is oh, it's a religion. And I know that we argue internally about that, but that's not what they're looking for, right? That nuanced debate. Oh, it's a religion. It's one of the smaller ones. We used to be Christian, but we kind of branched off from them a long time ago. But we do go to church on Sundays, and we have choirs and stuff, so you'd recognize that. You know, but we don't believe Jesus is the Son of God, and we don't believe in hell. I mean, in fact, a lot of UUs don't really believe in God, but that's not what's important. We have a lot of emphasis on things like social justice because we really care about all people being free. So that's what we do. I feel like Emerson would roll over in his grave if he heard that. But does that do Unitarian Universalism justice? I don't know. If I'm at a bar and someone hears that I'm a UU and says, what's that? I will just say, oh, it's a religion, a little one. And they'll go back to their beer and they'll be fine with that, right? They don't want to know more. But if the situation is, I'm talking to an acquaintance and they say, oh, that's not like a real religion, right? Because you guys don't believe in God. That's not like a religion. At that point, I'm switching over from what they want to know to what I want them to know. And if we were in an elevator, we would not get off. It's closed door, like, you know, and that's a very different answer. And in that case, we are going into theology, or we are talking at that point about how we are a radically Protestant post-Christian faith based in liberation. And yes, so those are the two answers. And I think both of them you can shorten or lengthen depending on context and what is called for. I think a lot. I have a background in linguistics, so I was very influenced by speech acts theory and the idea that every act of speaking does something, right? And this is very obvious, like in wedding ceremonies, when we say, I pronounce you married, it is the act of speaking that does that, right? Arguably, every act of speaking does something. And when we engage in these debates, right, the debates that are going on right now over, like, is the eighth principle too wordy? What is performed by that act of speaking?
So I just looked up creed because I'm on the computer. And it's got several definitions. I think the one we might want to use, though, it says a set of beliefs or aims which guide someone's actions, a set of beliefs or aims which guide someone's actions. And so in that sense, we don't all have to believe in the same creed. We all probably have one, though. And in our youth programs, we often have students write a credo, which is a snapshot of what their beliefs are in this moment when we go through the program. Seems like a really useful activity for all of us at various points in our lives to just sit down and take stock. What do I believe in? What guides my actions? So you said the word non-consensual, and I was really thinking too about calcified, that a lot of times our creeds, and we're going to move into that concept of covenant too, that our covenant becomes calcified. And it's something that fit very well for a particular stage, whether it was a stage in our individual lives or a stage in our church life. And things change, the world moves on, right? The free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and we move forward, but that creed or that covenant stays the same and it's become calcified.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing some of the setup conversations for this, I think you made this really good point about, like, the idea that you have to act in this world is not true in all religions. Like, and that we were talking about that part of that driver that, like, you really do need to act is that, like, this idea, what you just said, right? This idea that salvation isn't something that you that is decided when you die. And it's not something that you can get by just praying to God or praying to somebody. You, like, if we believe in salvation in this life, then we have to act to make that salvation possible.
This section about governance is about policies and procedures and some things that seem very far removed from faith, far removed from a trust in something beyond and inside of ourselves. So it seems very practical. And so how would this have anything to do with faithfulness? And we're really thinking about faith in terms of what are we being faithful to, and how can our governance be a full reflection of the values that we hold and the mission that we swear ourselves to when we're governing within a religious or congregational context. And so how can our governance, our policies, our procedures, our decisions be faithful to that value and mission that we covenant to? That's really where we were thinking about faithfulness. How can our governance be faithful to our values?
Yeah, I know when we were doing some of this brainstorming, I remember you saying this thing, but like around, is our governance faithful to our values? Are our values what's sitting in the center of our governance, or is it tradition, or is it our policies? Is that what's sitting in the center of our governance? And that our values probably should be, our faiths probably should be in the center of our governance, since we are religion and our religious organization.
At the end of the podcast, we'd like to say a few thank yous. Thank you to Unitarian Universalist Justice Arizona, or UU Jazz, especially to Janine Gelsinger and Phoebe Dubich. And thank you all for being with us. Remember that you can contact us at uusacredstory@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.